With the oppressive cloud cover back overhead, and all the excitement of the last few hours finally dying down, my stomach had made me painfully aware that I hadn't had anything to eat since Brass's stew. I joined the others down below deck, in the kitchen where Brass was quickly fixing up a meal for the crew and us, insisting that he could make something better than whatever mucklurk soup was that they apparently ate last night. The other foals and I were encouraged to train under a second profession back home. Brass went on happily to the whole group of us, using his magic to both slice up onions and use one of the silver-looking fish I'd seen from before, the Enclave attack. My main focus was to become a mission coordinator, but as easy as that was, nothing about it ever changes. It wasn't really challenging to me, being my talent and all. I could feel my mouth water as I sat at the table, slowly dragging my hooves across the smooth metal as I watched the steam wafting up and out of the large cook pot on the burners. One of the crew members took a seat across from me, drawing my attention up to him. He was one of the stallions Captain Tempest had ordered to fight the fire, and now that I look at him, he was not much younger looking than me. His turquoise coat was covered in dark smudges of soot, and only the roots of his short yellow mane were as bright as they should be. He smiled towards me nervously as he saw me looking over. He was hard to read through his exhausted expression, but he looked slightly angry. Why would he be angry? The ship rocked again. The noise of a wave washing through the gaping hole in the side of the ship filled the hallway outside. I let out a sigh and figured that any pony who nearly gets you killed is probably a good enough reason to be angry. I sighed and leaned forward, putting my head on the table as Brash finished his story. And that's how I got to be so good at cooking. He rapped the ladle against the pot in front of him, before hopping down from the stool he had to use in order to reach the stove. I heard him walk up, patting me on the back with a hoof. Don't worry, Backlash. You'll feel right as rain once you try this recipe for Scribe Florentine taught me. I grumbled as he walked past, my stomach doing the same as he entered the pantry. The hatch behind me opened up. Carlotta and Sky came in mid-laugh, both stopping before taking in big breaths. Oh, Celestia, it smells like heaven in here, Sky called out as Brass trotted back behind me, probably with more ingredients to throw into the pot. Thank you. Just you wait. It'll taste twice as good as it smells when I'm done, Brass said joyously. I turned my head to watch him cook again, Carlotta plodding off into the seat next to me and blocking my view. I looked up at her as she leaned down and looked at me. Her eyes were ones of a cold and calculating mercenary. Something doesn't make sense, she whispered over to me, stopping as the crew member across the table stared. She turned a gaze to him and glared at him as he left the kitchen. Ever since we were, quote-unquote, rescued, I can't help but wonder, what is this rust bucket doing in Philly in the first place? I know. I pushed myself back upright, keeping my eye on Brass and Sky as she started to help him. Captain Tempest tells me he was paid to look out for us there. I looked up at her as she glared forward blankly, a twinge of guilt on her face. Look, Backlash. I need you to listen to me. I think that bomb was the key to all of this. She didn't even flinch when she whispered, just keeping her gaze looking forward. I think we need to consider the possibility that Longbow is still working for Sherbert. What? I gasped and stood up, backing away from the table. How could you think that? I screamed out, freezing as I noticed Skyline and Brass staring at me. I groaned and rolled my eyes. You saw how she reacted to the audio log? She was mortified. Mortified from what became of her stepfather. Besides, you heard Longbow say it herself. Carlotta continued, now at full volume. She's the only pony on the ship trained to use explosives like that. I know you don't want to hear it, but what if Sherbert planted her with you for this exact reason? I know it looks that way, but there's no way she would do that, Brass yelled, stomping over to join the argument. Look, I'm going to go up and talk to the captain again. Screw his unwillingness to tell me. The sooner we figure out who paid him to pick us up, the sooner I can clear Longbow's name. I stomped my hoof and turned to leave. Skyline, can you make sure that doesn't burn? Brass said as he floated the ladle over to her. I need to hear for myself how wrong Carlotta is, and that Longbow couldn't do such a horrible thing. Skyline simply nodded as Brass and I headed out of the hatch of the kitchen, the heavy door shutting behind us with a clang. We cantered up the stairs and out on the deck, the cloud cover darkening the sky into its familiar evening darkness. The skies ahead were hazy with rain, the air feeling noticeably cooler. As we went up to the deck house, I could see the brown shores of Equestria. A good-sized town lay in front of it. I squinted as I noticed the whole town seemed strangely off, but I was unable to place exactly why. Bress's magic shoved open the hatch, the concerned voice of Captain Tempest coming from inside. "I know it's short notice and all, but if I'm not answering me is another one of your excuses to be lazy, Drydock. I'll be using you as a bait on my next run." The captain slammed the receiver of the radio down onto the navigation table with a sigh. "Is there something I can help you with, Backlash?" "Yes, Captain. I need to know who paid you," I said, looking out of the town as we slowly got closer to it. "Yeah, we need to prove Longbow's innocence." Brass cut in with an air of confidence, one which I desperately wanted to share. "Look, I was trying to avoid this, but you forced my position." Captain Tempest rubbed along his neck with a fetlock. "You see, I didn't rightly know who my pay came from, just as some mare in a fancy robe met me at the dry docks in Friendship City. She gave me 500 caps and told me to pick people up at Philly and not to tell said ponies who paid." "That's it?" I asked, as I walked to the front window, squinting out to get a better view of the old town. I'm sure there's something wrong about the town. The gears in my head were spinning fast as they were working to figure it out. "Fancy robe? What color was it?" Brass asked as if he was panicked. "Did it have gold trim? Maybe an odd symbol?" "What color?" Captain Tempest repeated. "I don't know. Maybe some sort of red? Ah, yes, I believe there was a gold trim. That's all I know." "Then that means it was the Steel Rangers," Brass uttered slowly. I continued looking out over the town, looking for anything out of place. There has to be something. "Goddesses, Backlash. I think Sherbert had the boat trip arranged." My eyes froze in the sky above the town as my mane twitched furiously. "Goddesses?" I turned around and looked at the captain, the gears in my head putting it together. No pony in sight, when we should have at least seen a hint of life. No fires coming from the chimneys of any house, even with the color and the cold of falling sinking in. Then there's a problem in my itchy mane every time I look at the sky. "Captain, I need you to turn the ship north and get the deck guns operating again." "You must be joking. I need to get the galleons repaired to Backlash. I can't get that done out here, now can I?" The captain laughed, turning us instead directly towards the barren town. "And why do you need—" I didn't let him finish, trotting to the computer and hoofing a pair of switches that read main battery starting up, and auxiliary hydraulic controls. "Captain, that town has alicorns in it. We need to leave." "Alicorns? Don't be daft." He pushed me aside from the fire control panel. "Those are just myths and legends. Don't tell me you still believe in those fool's tales." His horn glowed as he threw open the hatch of outside again, his expression shifting to one of anger. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get off of the main bridge." Willow came up through the floor with a whimper, looking around frantically until she saw me. "Backlash. She's near. I can feel them." I pressed my hoof into Captain Tempest's chest, slightly disturbing at how squishy his flesh was compared to Brass's. He looked shocked as he took a step back. "Look, alicorns are real, and if you don't turn this ship north and get those guns working, we're all going to die." "Oh, Luna," Willow called out. "I can see them. They're heading right towards us." I looked out of the windshield, and 3 of them were flying low across the river, heading straight towards the ship. "Backlash, I can hear her. She knows you're here." "Shit. Get those guns working!" Brass called out, scrambling to reach the fire control computer. "The lot of you are mad. There is no such—" He never finished his sentence, his eyes growing wide as he joined in gazing at the 3 purple monsters approaching us. Brass's horn blazed as he worked the gun control terminal, hitting keys at a scorchingly fast pace. The hydraulics of the forward deck gun whined to life as it rotated towards the front, the large gun leveling itself on the horizon. They're real. Oh, Celestia, they're real! The cannon lined up and fired, a trail of smoke blowing across the barrel as the rightmost alicorn evaporated into a cloud of red mist. The remaining two split off, each going a separate way as the gun followed one that flew high left. The captain was shaking, plopping back into his flank as he tried to process everything, muttering things that I couldn't make out. The section of a windshield in front of us was blasted inward, a blue alicorn staring through the hole as she became visible. She stared at us, her horn glowing brightly before a loud crack filled the bridge, a bright arc of electricity striking Captain Tempest in the chest. Brass and I both let out yelps as the captain collapsed onto the floor. "Fools! How dare you flee from us? The great and powerful goddess can no longer risk your further interference." "Leave them alone!" Willow screamed, taking off from the floor and streaking straight through the monster. The moment she touched, the goddess let out a piercing scream that filled the air. I hoofed at my head as the screaming dug deep, forcing me to clench my eyes tight as I flopped onto the floor. The roar of the cannon silenced the screaming as I felt the warm rain fill the air. I need to think. I needed some way to get us all to safety. "Backlash, we need to go!" Brass yelled, making me open my eyes. A fan pattern of gore stood out from the busted-out section. The bridge had been painted a dark crimson from the remains of the alicorn. I could taste the metallic fluid that slinked off my coat slowly, shuddering as I looked towards the young ghoul. Brass had also been coated in the alicorn gore, shaking lightly as a deep fear ran from his eyes. "Please, Backlash. We need to leave." "Don't worry, Brass. We're going to be fine," I said slowly, running over to the door, my hoof slipping out from under me, and I ended up sliding along the floor with a wet squeak. The purple form of an alicorn stepped up the walkway out the door, the hint of a smile across her muzzle as I locked up. "Oh, Celestia, this is it, isn't it? We have reconsidered. The goddess wishes for you to go with this one." I clenched my head as she pushed her voice into it again. I couldn't even tell myself to run as she stepped closer. "Agree to go and we'll spare your friends." "Why does she want me?" I shouted, trying to stall for time. If Sky and the others can make it topside. "The goddess wishes to limit the future losses to the Unity. The information you have may be useful." She gave a stern gaze as her horn glared. "We will leave, now." I finally got to my hooves as I felt a all too familiar teleportation magic warm the air around me, a layer of overglow enveloping the monstrosity's long horn. I squinted and braced myself, as I knew going with her was a really dumb idea. But do I really have any other choice if I want to save my friends? Maybe this would be better. If the goddess kept me, the secrets to the mirror pool would be lost with me. 42 would never win. "Get away from him, you bitch!" Brass yelled, using his magic to shove the shattered piece of glass from the busted window past my face, striking the jagged shard into the alicorn's neck. "Let's get out of here! Backlash! Run!" I felt Brass jumped onto my side, hanging off my neck as he gripped tightly. "Insolent fool!" She projected so loud that it made me jump, the light from her horn flickering before enveloping the group of us, the spell filling my ears with a light ringing as it took Brass and I from the ship. Pain. The one constant in my life over the last few weeks has been pain. I whimpered and clenched my eyes shut as the light from the teleportation spell wore away, my rear legs feeling like they had both been severed off with a hacksaw. Brass released his grip from me as the ringing wore off. "Backlash. The alicorn," he said, his voice filled with a joyous disbelief. I didn't care about the alicorn. The pain in my legs were accompanied with a new sensation of not being able to feel or move my rear hooves. "Ah, Celestia, don't tell me I've lost my legs." I opened my eyes wide at the thought, about to spin and look when I froze, the sight before me helping to take my mind away from the idea. The sad left eye of the purple alicorn Brass had stabbed looked blankly at me. The entire right half of its body merged into the brick wall of a building that we were now inside. The sharp glass, still embedded deep into its neck, dripped crimson shards onto the wooden floor, staining the dry, dusty wood. The glass must have caused it to lose focus. Without concentration, teleportation is a dangerous spell, Brass said, completely entranced with the oddity in front of him. I spun around with a smile on my face. Good thing we... I stopped as his eyes drifted behind me, just staring as a grim expression sank in. His gaze made my back legs explode in more pain, as if to remind my body that I needed to be suffering instead of, for once, giving me a break. I tried to turn to look, wincing and whining as it only made the pain worse. Brass, what happened? I managed to get out just above a whimper, biting down on my lower lip as I tasted my own blood. My words seemed to have little effect on breaking him from his shock. Brass! I don't know what to do. He spoke slowly, not looking away from my legs. What do I do? I could feel my chest tightening, my heart starting to pound against the rib slab as panic set in. What happened to my legs? Why can't I feel them? No, that was wrong. The problem is that I feel too much from them. All of it pain. Sweat beaded and rolled down my face as I tried to slow my breathing. Panicking doesn't help any pony backlash. You have to remain calm. Isn't that what Skyline always told me? Brass was still frozen. Brass! I yelled, making him jump and look at me. Sorry, Backlash. He shut his eyes and shook his head. The teleportation spell was miscast. Your back legs are fused into the wall of this building. My heart sank. That's okay, right? I asked, more so to try to reassure myself that I'd be fine. You can just get a hammer and... No, he shouted, cutting me off and making my forelegs lock up. When we reappeared, your legs became part of the bricks. If I break the bricks, then I'm taking part of your legs with it. Magic might be able to separate you, but I'm sorry. I can't do anything to help. My heart skipped a beat as something dropped to the floor above us with a loud thump. Muffled whispers came through it. Somebody was upstairs, and I prayed to Celestia that they weren't hostile. Brass's eyes lit up as he looked at the ceiling. Are they bad? He lowered his voice to a whisper, looking at me as I did my best to look confused through the pain. And your EFS, are they red? I looked at it, completely forgetting that I had it again. There were 4 marks. Only one of them were red. 4 total. I winced, and tried my best to keep my voice down. 1 is red. Stay there, Backlash. I'm gonna see if I can convince whoever it is to help us. Not like I could go anywhere else, I thought, as he galloped off to my right through a doorway, his hoof clacking on the old floorboards as he ran. My ears strained over the murmuring that erupted above me, hoping that they didn't shoot first and ask questions later. Don't panic, Backlash. The mutation was worse, I think, I told myself as my knees started to shake, the burning in my legs making it hard to think. What I needed was a distraction, something to keep my mind off of this. I tensed up as tight as I could, pulling myself into sats as the pain in my legs flared, draining off as the stable tech spell once again saved me from my suffering. Well, temporarily, at least. Without anything to target, the medical status screen fuzzed up and displayed several boxes around the back legs, as the figure was supposed to represent me. I pushed those thoughts from the back of my mind as I focused on bringing up the inventory screen, which brought up another kind of pain that reminded me that I had lost all my gear escaping from East Orchard. I looked across the tabs, sliding the display over to the audio log section. The first file in the list was displayed Ministry of Arcane Sciences Chief Twilight Sparkle Project Log, Mirror Pond Research, Merging and Repository Summary. Wow. That title was so long that it could have used a summary. Regardless, now is probably the best excuse I'll have to learn anything that could keep me several steps ahead of 42. With that, a small rectangular box popped up. the voice of a 120-year-old dead Ministry Mayor filling my head. Ministry of Arcane Science Chief Twilight Sparkle Project Log. Mirror Pond, Research Merging, and Project Repurposing Summary. The Mirror Pond Ministerial Relief Project has been indefinitely suspended due to the inadequacy of Pinky's clone's intelligence that was stated in my logs from the basic Mirror Pond experiments. Just in case the OIA misfiles the originals, again, the summary of closure of those experiments was due to a pair of the clones having extensive relations with civilians. The subsequent births of 2 healthy foals have at least proved that the clones are physically complete and not sterile, as previously presumed. Though the foals are being classified as the only good thing to come of this project, it proved that the 40 copies we have made are unmanageable with their basic intelligence, diverting back to Pinky's primal need for fun too often to be deemed worth keeping the pool running. The repurposing of this project is due to, in part, that I had previously theorized that if I were to find a way to increase the amplitude of the magic running through the pond, I might be able to increase the intellectual capacity of each of the clones. The low end of my calculations points to an intelligence rate where a set of clones would be able to make ideal soldiers, able to follow orders and operate equipment. The high end of my calculations points towards keeping the copied pony's intelligence compared to the base subjects used. If proven successful, I might even be able to use a pool to copy myself, possibly cutting years of research off the IMP project. Though this requires the design and creation of a new class of Arcanoflux reactor, something I have personally tasked StableTech to work on. As of now, I filed the project requisition forms to build the rest of the facility and prototype reactor. Scheduled completion is in 3 months' time, and as per normal protocol, Stage 1 of testing will begin the moment all the preliminary checks come back normal. The log clicked and ended. So, first log down, and there wasn't anything in it that I didn't already know. In fact, this one log contained everything I'd learned over the last few weeks. Wow, all that pain and suffering seems like it was such a waste now. If only I had this in the beginning. The log screen fuzzed away, halting my train of thought as the crystalline form of Bit built up in front of me. Thank you, Minister Chief Backlash. I knew that Pink told me P-coding could be a nightmare to navigate, but it's so easy to get lost in it. Thank me? Why? I haven't seen Bit since I passed out in Philly. Which actually reminds me, I need to ask her why the hell she sent me into the air above the Deltamere. Oh, right. Sorry about that. I think I was off a single decimal point in the trillionths place on the z-coordinate. That, or the entire alignment of Equestria has been thrown off by almost a meter. Bit tilted ahead and looked me over. Well, as much as I could tell. I couldn't know for sure when she doesn't actually have eyes rendered. But a single decimal place. I could have died from that fall. Hell, I would have died if Skyline hadn't gotten me in time. How could this be so casual of a mistake for her? And yet you did survive. Bit gestured to poke at my chest. You know, there was a moment when I was routing the coordinates when I thought to myself, why should I leave? This is all I've ever known. Why should I put my trust in the word of some pony who is more or less a stranger? Bit sat down, putting her hoof to her chest. Because they need me, is what I thought. For the first time in a very long time, some pony needs me. But why wouldn't she want to leave? She was doing fine when I pulled her out of the casing, and I trusted Bit to get me out of the facility, and she did. And now she said that she wasn't all right after all? Celestia Backlash, for priding yourself on being so observant, there is no end to your own stupidity, is there? She got us out, and the first thing I do is chastise her. I needed her help, and I took her willingness for granted. How horrible am I to just assume that she didn't have her own problems, and that every pony else? Why, just a few minutes ago, Brass risked his life for mine on the ship. Permission to speak freely, Chief? Bit sat down on the floor, saluting me in a way that made me feel both flattered and guilty. I would have nodded, but I forgot I was in Sats, but she seemed to get the idea and relaxed. I was actually talking about Pink needing me, but I must say, with how you put it, you're kind of a jerk. Pink told me that as long as she had been observing you in the wasteland, your friends had been there for you every time you've needed them, and you've not given a single heartfelt thanks to any of them. Not even Longbow, who I can tell is very emotionally distressed over the nature of Lemon's last recording. Bit had a point, one of which reminded me of something the old man used to tell me. He used to say, "There is no quicker way to see what monster you've become than through the eyes of those who know you." He would repeat that line until he was blue in the face, believing in an honest trader. He knew that customers were friends, and that cheating out a friend was the quickest way to become a villain. I didn't want to be a villain. There were enough of them in the wastelands now. Isn't that what I've been doing? Cheating my friends out of the comfort of knowing that I care for them? But is it really my fault? I mean, I have been trying to figure out a way to stop 42. No, get that out of your head. They have been trying so much harder than me to find a way. Without them, I would have been dead already. And for that alone, I owe them more than I can ever give. You know, some of the things Pink has told me that you've done in the wasteland would have made you a monster in the eyes of Chief Twilight. But there was a time before the war where she and the other ministry mayors would have devoted themselves to redeeming a pony like you. She got up and started to fuzz away slowly. Chief Twilight made me believe like she does, and that's ultimately what pulled me out of East Orchard. Sometimes, all it takes for a pony to change is just being shown that they have a second chance to be better. As the last of her disappeared, Sats shuddered and ended, slowly drawing me back into normal time. I felt as if some pony had turned on an electric cook stove, and I was slowly increasing the heat against my hind legs. With time agonizingly returned to normal, I cried out loudly, Brass's hoofsteps being drowned out by my own whining. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to be this way. Oh, Celestia, I'm so sorry." I screamed out and nearly collapsed. Skyline has never left me. Not once has she failed to be there for me. And Brass, even with how I've treated him, with what he went through for me, Brass has proven to be the most amazingly loyal pony I've ever met. My ears perked up for a moment as I heard shuffling about upstairs. Low drone of voices instead of gunfire was the only comforting thing I knew in the hell I exited in. There was a lot of movement upstairs now. Quick hoofsteps sounded down the hallway. "Backlash! I found a family upstairs who can help!" He yelled as he rounded the corner back into the room. An older, charcoal-coated earth pony rounded the corner behind him. He held a sledgehammer at his muzzle, freezing and dropping it as his eyes were drawn to the half-exposed alicorn. A red-coated unicorn mare about his age poked her head around the doorframe, her purple eyes looking me over before she too gazed past me. "By Celestia, is that what we're hiding from? I thought it was the gangs." She closed her eyes and looked away. It looks just like the goddesses." "You've never seen an alicorn before?" Brass asked as the charcoal stallion grumbled something I couldn't make out, picking up his sledgehammer in his muzzle again. I watched in horror as he craned his neck, swinging the heavy hammer up before bringing it down against the wall. I bit my lip again, to keep from screaming, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth before I felt it start to drip. The stallion watched out of the corner of his eye as my blood dripped into the wooden floor, a thin trail of smoke emanating from each drop as it hit. He looked up into my eyes and gave me a look that I wasn't expecting. He showed sympathy. He promptly swung again, the crunch of bricks punctuating each shock of pain that coursed through my body. On one of his swings, there was a loud crack, the wall shifting as part of it came loose. The immediate crack that followed was not from the wall. The surge of pain was so strong, I felt like I had all the wind knocked out of me. I heaved as my stomach retched. The smell of burning wood drifted into my nose as I struggled to keep myself from falling over. The stallion dropped the hammer with a sigh. "Damn. Looks like we'll have to cut him loose. I'll have to get the doc from next door." He turned and looked at the mare, giving me a moment to notice that he had the same brand on his flank that Ripcord did. That information was quickly pushed to the back of my mind as he gave the mare a kiss before disappearing around her. "Brass, I'm sorry." I clenched my jaw, his eyes trying to keep focus on him. "You helped me so much, and I never thank you." I groaned out as his expression became one of worry. I don't know why, but I chuckled to myself. Fuck. You've given me more than I could have ever asked. Brass shook his head. Everything that's happened to you is my fault. If I hadn't kicked you in that bunker... He stomped a hoof on the floor. Shut up, Brass! Your name was on that note, too. I screamed, halfway to stop him from beating himself up over that, and halfway because I knew that I could feel the bone protruding from my leg. I tried to keep my forelegs locked back to stop them from shaking so much. I don't know if it was fate or luck, but since we met, you are more than my friend. You've become part of my family. It was getting hard to focus. My head was pounding as sweat was running into my eyes. The smell of acid slowly eating into the wood had now filled the room. My ears perked up as I could hear hoofbeats on the floor down the hallway. My savior's returning quickly, it seems. Hopefully with a doctor who can fix this. The charcoal stallion trotted in, closely followed by a brown unicorn levitating a small bottle with him. The unicorn had a predominant limp on his stride, his blue eyes unwavering as he looked at my legs. He rubbed the gray stubble on his chin as he levitated a tablet of what looked like buck out of the bottle and up to his muzzle, chomping down on it without much thought. Every pony out. I have no time to waste on those legs, as they aren't going to amputate themselves, he said bluntly, as if he was almost bored. I gasped at the realization of what he said hit me. He was going to cut my legs off. Just take them off. I caught him looking at my eyes. Studying how I was reacting was my best guess. Oh, don't worry. The Hydra should leave you good as new. He dropped down to a whisper and gave me a smile. But that's only if you don't die from the shock, or blood loss first. He closed the bottle of buck and tossed it away. How is he a doctor? And you're their doctor? Brass exclaimed with impeccable timing. I watched the doctor's horn glow, a particularly large rotor saw levitating through the doorway. How observant. The doctor snapped back at Brass. Now tell me, Mr. Observant, what kind of acid are we dealing with? He set a large saw down and lowered himself to the floor, looking over the crimson pool below me. I whined as my knees screamed at me. The pain in my legs dulled down as long as I could hold myself still. Dulling down was a relative term when you've been in much pain as I have. The doctor looked up at me with a slightly annoyed expression. Well, if no pony's going to tell me, I'll just have to start guessing. How are we supposed to know? His blood just changed a few days ago. Brass looked and took a step back as the doctor's magic affixed what looked like a plastic poncho over himself. Well, then tell me. Does it melt through steel, concrete, glass, plastic? The doctor started to list off. Glass. Brass's face lit up as he all but screamed the answer. It can melt through glass. It doesn't seem to have much effect on metal. And obviously not much wood either. As he spoke, his words seemed to get harder to hear. The throbbing in my head seemed to lighten as the words started to roll. I shut my eyes and shook my head, bringing everything back into focus around me. I felt someone tap my cheek a few times, opening my eyes as I saw it was the doctor. Hydrofluoric acid. Nasty stuff. Which means both good news and bad news. Which do you want to hear first? The charcoal stallion trotted back into the room, carrying a big plastic bubble helmet. As the doctor took it, I looked over to where Brass was, only finding him missing. Wait, when did Brass leave? Good news first, then. The acidity of your blood won't wear down my tools, so this should be quick. The doctor hoisted the large saw up in his levitation, flipping the switch. The loud screech of the old blade spinning filled my ears before it stopped suddenly. The doctor nodded to the stallion and shooed him out the doorway. The bad news is that the active chemical in Med-X won't work for you. So this will be the worst pain you've felt in your entire life. He clicked the button, the saw spinning up again as he cranked his neck over to look at my legs, stopping the saw again. Oh, and I won't blame you if you pass out. Just makes it easier on me to not listen to your screaming.